Good morning, criminal justice class. Welcome to our first screencast where we're going to take some notes and go over some material. Just a couple different things before we get started, just kind of a few things to help you follow along during the screencast is first thing is I encourage you guys to take notes. We're going to be reviewing a lot of different material. I'm going to be moving pretty quickly here. There's going to be some stuff that I'm specifically going to tell you that I think you should jot down in your notes someplace so that those can be easily accessible for you so you can be successful on the upcoming assignments and activities. Okay. Second thing is feel free to pause this at any moment. You can always go back, re-listen at any time that you want. But I would encourage you to just please take your time as you follow through with this screencast. Third thing is make sure you're listening. It's important for you guys to pay attention and to listen to every detail that I say. I don't have a whole lot of reading materials that goes along with this, so you're going to have to make sure that you're listening to what I say throughout these presentations. And then lastly, just know if you're having a hard time understanding something, we will review these materials or these notes during our Google Meets if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Okay? So as we get started here, our first lesson that it's going to be in this class is going to be about what is crime. Okay. And the purpose of this lesson is to understand, when a person commits an action, what is considered criminal versus what is not considered criminal. Okay. And so as we get started, there's a definition here that I think you guys should definitely write down in your notes, and you should have this accessible. This is what the definition that we're going to be using over the course of the next 2 weeks. And we're going to go through each of these different components individually. We're specifically going to have an emphasis on the first and second, and that's what your activity will be about. But here's your definition. A crime is an action or omission that is intentional, that violates criminal law, is classified as a felony, misdemeanor, and or a violation, which I'll get to that, and is committed without a legal justification or defense. Okay? So take a moment, make sure you jot that definition down word for word, and here we'll get started. So the first component of our definition is that is an action or omission. Now, this is also known as actus reus. It's a Latin word that's just meant to say that what you did is a voluntary act. Now, this may sound a little bit redundant or may sound a little bit weird, but a crime must be an actual act. You must voluntarily put yourself in a position where you can commit some sort of criminal action. Okay? Merely having intent or wanting to commit something criminal is not actually considered a crime. You can only imagine if we lived in a world where every thought that we had would get us into trouble. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay, so the first piece of a crime is it must be a voluntary act. This is called action or actus reus, and we're going to go over a couple different pieces with this. Okay, the second part of that is also going to be known as an omission, and this means that it is a failure to act. And sometimes you can do nothing and still be held criminally liable for it. There are some people who are in certain positions that have a legal responsibility to do something and they choose not to. That can be considered criminal. For example, if you have like a lifeguard and a lifeguard lets someone in a pool drown and they do not jump in to dive in to save that person, that lifeguard can be held criminally liable for whatever may happen to that swimmer who drowned. Okay? This is known as an omission. Okay, there is an exception to actus reus, and this is called conspiracy, and that's simply planning out a crime itself. Make sure you jot that word conspiracy down, and you've got a good definition for it. It's simply planning to commit a crime. Okay? Now, the fun piece about conspiracy is that anybody who is involved in conspiracy can be charged with the crime itself, even if they don't actually do the crime, or even if they weren't actually somebody who helped carry out the crime itself. For example, if 4 individuals plan out to rob a bank and they devise a plan, they can all be arrested for conspiracy to commit robbery. Even though they did not do the action of committing the crime, they are still held criminally liable because they legitimately planned it out. Okay? Now, the second piece of a crime, this is called mens rea. This is having intent. You must have intent to commit a crime in order to be found guilty of it. In order to have mens rea or intent, there's three different pieces to it. And one, you must be able to know right from wrong. We'll talk about different examples later on in this class of what can, potentially not cause somebody to know right from wrong. You have to know what you're doing is wrong, and you have to intend to do it. All right, we'll look at a couple different examples of this. Okay, so we'll just start with example number one here. And so what I want you to think about is two drivers, two individuals driving a car. Both of them end up hitting and killing a pedestrian. Okay, driver number one never saw the pedestrian and did the absolute best to either veer out of the way or brake or do everything possible not to hit that person. But they hit the person anyway and kills them. And this person is not criminally liable, meaning he or she cannot be held for criminal charges. Right? Even though he or she killed the person, they did their very best to not do that. Okay? They did not have intent to kill that pedestrian. Now, at the same time, that person probably will be held financially or medically liable, meaning they will have to pay for medical bills or funeral costs, and will probably face a rather large lawsuit at the same time. But they cannot be charged criminally. Driver number two saw that pedestrian and intended to hit that pedestrian, so the driver chose to speed up. Okay? That clearly shows that that driver wanted to kill that person. That means that there is an element of intent there, meaning that there is mens rea. This individual will be charged with the murder of the pedestrian that he hit. Okay? Now, moving on, there's a couple different other examples of how mens rea works. Okay? Now, maybe you think of the term negligence if you're acting recklessly in some way that could result in a crime. Simply negligence may not actually make you guilty of a crime. And so I had put an example up here. And let's just say if you're at your house and you leave your bike in the sidewalk and some kid's walking by and that kid trips over the bike and skids his knee and slams his face on the ground and gets a concussion. And will you be charged with a crime? No, you were just being negligent and leaving your bike out into the street. Now, you will probably have to pay for once again, the medical bills of that kid who fell, but you can't be charged with a crime. Now, on the flip side, that turns into a more criminal case if you start acting negligent in a more extreme way. For example, and I know this is a little bit ridiculous, but just bear with me here. Let's just say if you left out a weapon or an explosive outside or in the street and someone else was able to get a hold of it. And then let's just say if that person who got a hold of it got hurt or used those weapons to hurt somebody else, now you will be held criminally responsible for whatever happens to that person. Okay? That's called criminal negligence. Now, there's some exceptions to mens rea, two of them that I'll talk about here: mistake of fact and mistake of law. A mistake of fact is relatively simple. What you did was simply an accident. You didn't have the intent to do what you actually did. And so I got a couple different examples of that. Let's just say you're on a plane and you accidentally grab someone else's bag because it looks just like yours, and you take it and you walk off with that. Now, would you be charged with theft? Probably not, because it was just simply an accident. You didn't want to commit that crime. Okay. Or I put another example up here. Let's just say if you were running a business and you accidentally sold, once again, this is extreme, some cocaine, believing that it was actually baking powder. You didn't know that was actually cocaine, therefore they can't charge you with distribution of drugs. Okay. Mistake of fact is lack of mens rea, lack of intent. It was simply an accident. Okay. The other one is called mistake of law, and this means that you're unaware of a specific law that exists, and that's why you chose to do that action. This usually doesn't work. The old saying is that ignorance is never an excuse, and that would be the same here. Is it would be you'd be hard pressed to prove to a judge or a jury that you were unaware of a specific crime. Now, this can happen for maybe more extreme and difficult to understand laws, including tax laws and business law, but you are expected to know the laws as American citizens. Okay. Now, moving on to number 3, the third aspect of a crime is called violating criminal law. And this one may sound a little bit ridiculous as well, but what this simply is saying is that in order for you to commit a crime, there must actually be a law that says that that's a crime itself. If there is no law, you can't commit a crime. And so I put on here on this slide a couple different examples of where different laws come from. And you guys certainly don't need to know where these different laws come from, but I think it's rather interesting just for you to check out. For example, the states, they come up with their own laws regarding morality, meaning every state has the option to define its own terms for murder, define its own terms for what is speeding, what is arson, what is burglary, what is theft. They determine most basic criminal laws that you think of. Okay. Now, more of the extreme laws come from our United States Congress. They deal with more laws, including drug laws, taxes, terrorism, security, et cetera, et cetera. Congress creates laws that affect the nation as a whole, whereas states create laws that affect only those who are living or currently in that particular state. Most laws actually come from this thing called case law, though. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to I think it's our 4th interval in this class. Most of the courts have to redefine law throughout time. The United States Constitution is a very broad document. Sometimes specific laws are not actually created from it, and so it's up to our courts system to actually define what most laws are. We'll get to this one a little bit later. Okay. 4th component. This is called being classified as a felony, misdemeanor, or a violation. Okay. And so we're going to talk about felonies. We're going to talk about misdemeanors and violations. Simply put is this, felonies are the worst types of crimes that you can commit. These are the ones that you are more than likely going to spend time in prison, not jail. And we'll get to the difference when we get to our 5th interval. This includes most violent offenses, including kidnapping, rape, burglary, murder, etc., etc. Okay. Now, the other one is called a misdemeanor. This is less serious. This usually involves cases such as vandalism, disorderly conduct. DUIs or OWIs are considered to be misdemeanors. You can spend usually up to a year in jail, or you will most likely get tagged with a fine for that. The last type is called a violation. This is types of crimes where just a simple citation is imposed. Those of you who've gotten speeding tickets or loitering tickets, curfew tickets, you committed a violation. Sorry, are you done? Okay, and then sorry for the little delay there. The last component of a crime is that it's committed without a legal justification or defense. Now, if you have a good or legal reason for doing something or committing a crime, that can usually be exempted and you will not be criminally charged. These we will talk about specifically later in the week. We're going to talk about specific ones, but this includes stuff like self-defense and the insanity plea. Okay. And so kind of as I wrap it up here, what I want you to do is just make sure you review that definition that we had of what a crime is. It is an action or omission that is intentional, that violates criminal law, and is classified as a felony, misdemeanor, violation, and done without a legal justification. Now, the activity you're going to do with this is going to go along with action or omission and the intent piece, actus reus and mens rea. And so I want you to check Google Classroom for that activity. Follow the instructions. We'll talk about your answers and any questions you have during our Google Meet session on Tuesday. Thank you.